So let's talk about comparative analysis or comparing text. Now this is a slideshow that I have from a different class, but I wanted to use it because I thought a lot of the information on here was really applicable to what we're doing, and it gives you kind of an overview of where we're at. Comparative analysis is taking a look at two pieces and really trying to see where they are similar and where they're different. You will probably do this in a lot of the other classes when you might be, say, comparing two different treatment plans or maybe two different courses of action, right? And the question might be posed as to which of these two is better and why. That's going to be a persuasive piece, right? But the real gist of it is they want you to be able to look and see where they overlap and where they're different, and then why is that significant? So what is comparative analysis? An intellectual activity in which you examine the similarities or differences between two or more things in order to come to new insights or conclusions about those things. Okay, so if you look at this Venn diagram over here, and they try to give that, this is a really nice way to look at how things are similar, how things are different. So cats are visible, they don't like people. Okay. Invisible friends are not visible and they do like people. So those are differences, right? But then you see where they overlap? They have fabricated personalities. And we put personalities onto cats. So you see, like, that's their personality. That's the way they act. That's the way they do these things, right? And so do our invisible friends because they're completely created figments of our imagination. So we layer that personality on top of it, right? So here then, what we're looking at is where they're same, where they're different. Again, okay, similarities and differences. But the real key then is why do they have the fabricated personalities, right? And that's that part I just talked about, how we layer those on. And that's the significant piece, right? We want to really investigate not just where they're the like and where they're dislike, but why does it really matter? This is the assignment that my other class is doing, but I like these kinds of questions. These are things that you might be able to reveal the similarities or the differences. Okay. Make a judgment about the quality. Okay. So when you look at them, okay, you've looked at the similarities, you looked at the differences. Now what we want to do is, how were those messages delivered? So maybe they both have a very similar message, but they use totally different kinds of language, or they use very different kinds of examples. Maybe one of them had lots of really grim, dark, scary examples, where the other one was a very scientific, clinical approach, right? Maybe one was really dealt with a lot of concrete examples, where the other one was maybe a little more abstract. This is where you get to really look at the way it was delivered. Now, we're going to do this specifically when we get into the rhetorical analysis in a couple weeks. And then if I can look at how they're similar, how they're different, how they're delivered, then I can synthesize new information about it. And I can really get a new insight on the topic. The example that is given here is these two nursery rhymes, Nancy Dawson and Little Tom Tucker. And then looking at them, I can then start to look for a valid basis of comparison. What does that mean? I'm looking for a real reason to compare them. Yes, two objects, if I take like a cup and a pencil, how could I ever compare those two things? They are so different from each other, right? Granted, they're both concrete objects and they might be on your desk, but that's about as far as the similarities go. And the only place that we can compare them, right? There's going to be lots of differences there, obviously, but there's no way to really be able to judge them against each other. So before we develop a thesis, before we jump into this and really try to figure out where we're at, it's helpful to dig a little deeper into the similarities and differences to make sure that we found not only valid points, but interesting points. And by that is meaning that these are things that we could actually talk about when it comes to our audience. So similarities, they both rhyme, they're nursery rhymes, and they use old fashioned. Well, okay, so what? Like, we know that already, right? That's kind of stating the obvious. But if we look at, they both comment on a young person. Okay. Or maybe it's boy versus girl, right? They both mention marriage. Okay. Now, who would have thought that a nursery rhyme would have a deeper meaning like that is aimed at adults, or maybe a message that is ingrained early and then is kind of discovered in adulthood, right? So, if you think of it in that way, now these two poems have a lot that we can work with, and we can really find an interesting thesis to really develop. When we are looking at these two texts, we really should be asking these what, how, and why questions. So, in other words, why do they both focus on work and marriage? How do they get this message across? What do they both say? How big of a difference does it make? And then we're really taking this piece that we discovered and taking it to the next level. So when we get to that point then, and through this example, the possible thesis that we've developed here is both nursery rhymes communicate a practical message to children about what makes a young man or woman marriage material. Not that, or that only those with a strong work ethic and gainful employment should be desirable to be a spouse. And so then we've taken these two separate pieces of work, we found a way to link them together, we discovered a meaningful link between them, and then we synthesized new information about them. So the big key here is that I want you to take away is that when we look at these texts and we're trying to draw the comparisons between them, okay, so let's think about how can we compare them? What is the logical connection between them? Is it a meaningful connection to talk about, right? And then what does that say in a larger context?